Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Angel Olsen, Burn Your Fire for No Witness. Now, before we begin, let me share with you all something that's fairly common to music nerds, including myself. We all have a strong sense of history. We've often built ourselves a storied back catalog of music from the past that we like to revisit or hold up as classics. And nothing gives most music nerds more pleasure than finding ways to link the music of the past to the music of today. And while that can make some music nerds rather insufferable, and I count myself among that number on occasions, it can be rewarding to trace the lineage of a song or of an artist, especially when that artist doesn't quite sound distinctly modern. So, to indulge a bit in that vice of mine, let's talk a bit about Angel Olsen. An indie folk singer-songwriter, she burst onto the scene in 2012 with Halfway Home, a debut album that I liked but never really quite loved. I've mentioned often that I'm not really a fan of white guys with acoustic guitars, and I often hold the fairer sex under that same umbrella. Now, what made Angel Olsen stand out the most was her voice, as it was very reminiscent of traditional country singers from the 50s and 60s. Most notably for me, Patsy Cline. It was emotive, and it was powerful, and it had a great wounded vulnerability to it that was well balanced against her impressive stage presence and charisma. And it really was quite compelling, almost enough to make you overlook the fact that the instrumentation wasn't anything all that stellar, and that the lyrics were only passable at best. Pretty, but not exactly substantial or powerful on their own. Sure, they supported her vocal style well, but if we want to draw a Patsy Cline comparison, she's not as good as a songwriter as, let's say, Willie Nelson. On top of that, there were moments where I felt that Angel Olsen might have oversold her vocals just a little bit. She never engaged in the histrionics that annoy me with some vocally talented indie folk singers. They know who they are. But there are moments that definitely lacked subtlety, and that did kind of annoy me. So, when early buzz was suggesting that her newest album, Burn Your Fire for No Witness, was going in a rougher, more upbeat direction, well, I was definitely interested. I wasn't sure how good it was going to sound, but a lack of memorable melodies, that was a problem with her last album. And now that she was on a new label with a taste for alternative country, maybe it would give her instrumentation a bit more of a kick. So, how'd it go? To be honest, this record is, like its predecessor, good, but not great. And the really frustrating part about it is that how it should have been so much better than it is, because there were choices that were clearly made in the production and sound of this record that they really don't play to Angel Olsen's strengths as a performer, and you really can't excuse that. So, okay. Let's start with the one element that I found worked the best overall, and the one I will definitely compliment: the lyrics and the songwriting. Now, I'm not gonna go on record and say that Angel Olsen is a great songwriter, because she's not. But on an album about complicated or failing relationships and finding one's self-esteem amidst that, she's working very much in her wheelhouse, and it's a very good fit for her. The album thematically explores her progression from desperate loneliness and searching for that relationship that can make her feel special, to discovering her inner confidence and finally trying to help an old partner climb out of his own depression. And then there's some solid texture and some great detail to the lyrics that does give them more emotional payoff than definitely on her last album, which I really appreciated. And it helps that the progression and flow to this album that there is a narrative arc. And while it's rather conventional and the technical songwriting is exactly what you would expect from an Angel Olsen record, cryptic, exposed, never striking directly at the point, but sketching a very vivid emotional picture, well, it really does work here. And you know, the rougher instrumentation, it was a welcome shift for her. Even though I did find the guitar lines lacking in interesting melodies or real force and energy, they had some garage rock inspired sizzle and smolder that I really did like, especially on one of my favorite tracks, High Five, even if I found some of the bass or percussion not particularly impressive. And the album does manage to build to a few good crescendos, especially on my favorite track of the album, Dance Slow Decades, arguably the best song on the album. But it's in the instrumentation that we start to see the first problems, or the first signs of a problem, because while there is more energy, it doesn't really build to a real focused fire. And that's before we get to the slower tracks, which barely have any fire or presence at all outside of Angel Olsen herself. And coupled with the lack of good hooks or strong melodies or even memorable solos, it doesn't exactly help this album's staying power. Now, All that could have been redeemed if Angel Olsen managed to back up her lyrics or rougher instrumentation with some fire of her own in her vocal delivery. And here's where we're gonna have to tackle the really big creative misstep on this album. See, when you have a force of emotive personality like Angel Olsen, and you have songs that require real anger and curdled frustration, you want to be able to support her in the mix, put her front and center, and you want to encourage that explosive fire. Instead, the production shoves her midway to the back and buries her emotive texture under a lo-fi microphone. And look, while I get that particular choice on a sonic level when it comes to the indie rock that inspired this record, I also get the impression that Angel Olsen made a conscious choice to tune back some of her more exaggerated vocals from her first record and go for a more subtle emotional performance, which would have been fine and great if her voice was positioned properly in the mix, because by opting for rougher vocal production, you lose the subtlety in the fuzz, and her emotional presence on the record is a lot weaker as a result. In other words, Angel Olsen isn't a Lydia Lovelace. She's not a fire spitter. She works as more of a theatrical performer, and her voice works at best when it's front and center in the mix, especially when she's going for more nuance in her delivery. And that's the other thing. Angel Olsen's vocal delivery calls back to a classier time in delivery, even in country music. And it's a really jarring fit with the fuzz-saturated, rougher instrumentation, especially considering that it's nowhere near tight enough melodically to support her there. And while the album doesn't suffer the abuse of reverb that's afflicting bad indie rock like a cancer, the composition here is scattershot and not particularly interesting, catering to wall of sound techniques that don't help Angel Olsen's strengths and vocal direction, especially in the production elements. So look, in short, while I do appreciate some of the disparate elements on this record, and I do really like the lyrical arc, there's something there, this album musically just does not do it justice whatsoever. It talks about burning fires, but most of all I get here is a damp smolder that does not play to Olsen's biggest strengths as a performer. I appreciate that she was opting for a more subtle direction, and on a different record it could have worked, but nobody told her production team what her plan was, and it really hurts this record from being as memorable and as powerful as it could have been. As a rating, look, I still like the lyrical direction enough to consider this album a success, and I see enough of the elements on display to think that in an alternative universe, this album really could have worked. But as it is for me, it's a 6 out of 10, and it's only a tentative recommendation. If you're an Angel Olsen fan, you'll probably like her here on this album, but honestly, I think she deserved better than this. So, So thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Bit of a shorter review this time, but I've got a busy week ahead of me. School by Q, Dierks Bentley, The Fray, St. Vincent, got lots to cover. So if there's anything else you want me to cover up going forward, or if there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. So until then, see you next time.